All right. We are now recording. Hello, everybody who's watching this recording, and hello, you guys, Jeannie and Ida and Larry and Janet.
Right.
Today, we're going to go through the last half of Deuteronomy 21 all the way through chapter 25 of Deuteronomy. We're covering a lot of ground. We're not going to read all those verses, but we'll read the ones that are really the key ones. But first, as usual, we're going to remember where we are in this whole journey through Deuteronomy. Last week, we were emphasizing the importance of putting God's laws into practice. And we'll continue that this week. Last week, we noted that in a sinful, fallen world, laws are necessary to restrain evil. That might be the understatement of the whole world. Therefore, God helped us out by telling us what our laws should be. And he gave us laws that ensured justice, governed warfare, both within the Canaan country that the Israelites were supposed to take over, and then without, and how their first step, if they were going to have a conflict with somebody outside their territory, was to try mercy first, and then proceed with the necessary next steps depending on the outcome. And then also some laws about bringing atonement for a land that suffered and was corrupted by human activity. In today's lesson, Moses is going to present laws about family protection and criminal justice and neighborly conduct, and then social distinctions, or rather keeping distinct as a separate entity. And we'll see how that all fits together. Personal integrity, and then just some miscellaneous rules about daily living, getting along with people. Well, let's start with protecting the family. So we're going to read some verses from chapter 21 and chapter 24. We're going to read verses 15 through 21 of Deuteronomy 21, and then the first 4 verses of 24.
Suppose a man has 2 wives, but he loves one and not the other, and both have given him sons. And suppose the firstborn son is the son of the wife he does not love. When the man divides his inheritance, he may not give the larger inheritance to his younger son, the son of the wife he loves, as if he were the firstborn son. He must recognize the rights of his oldest son, the son of the wife he does not love, by giving him a double portion. He is the first son of his father's virility, and the rights of the firstborn belong to him. Suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or mother, even though they discipline him. In such a case, the father and mother must take the son to the elders as they hold court at the town gate. The parents must say to the elders, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious and refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of the town must stone him to death. In this way, you will purge this evil from among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid.
And now we'll skip to 24 verses, the first 4 verses.
Suppose a man marries a woman, but she does not please him. Having discovered something wrong with her, he writes a document of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. When she leaves his house, she is free to marry another man. But if the second husband also turns against her, writes a document of divorce, hands it to her, and sends her away, or if he dies, the first husband may not marry her again, for she has been defiled. That would be detestable to the Lord. You must not bring guilt upon the land of the land the Lord your God is giving you as a special possession.
Okay, so we'll start out by noting that the foundation for human society is the family. It's a gift from God for which no substitute has ever succeeded. God made the home to remedy the one thing that was not good, that man should be alone. In Genesis, second chapter of Genesis, that's the only time when God was looking back on what he made, that he didn't say it was either good or very good. He said it was not good that man should be alone. His law commanded the Israelites to honor father and mother as well. And this honor extended across the generations. When the home decays, then you can forget about the nation now that you're part of. It's going to quickly dissolve and go away because the home is the foundation of our country. It's what makes America great, for example, and other countries. But it's looking broadly at the United States. The a marriage between a man and a woman is what makes us strong. And then there are laws about the firstborn son. That's where we kind of, it says God's, you start reading that and it says, if a man is married to two wives. And so God's law allowed polygamy and divorce because of the hardness of people's hearts, according to what Jesus said in Matthew 19. Yet, even in imperfect homes like that, which we have today, God expected justice and order. Okay, so the law of the day was that the firstborn was to receive a double portion of the inheritance. And that was to apply across the board, even if you were in one of these mixed marriages where the mother was not the favored wife or some other thing that happened in the family. See, that rule protected the rights of every child. It wasn't the child's fault for whatever the parents messed up. And it restrained favoritism as well. God sometimes, in his wisdom, did bypass this firstborn law to achieve his purposes because, for example, he chose Isaac over Ishmael and Jacob over Esau. So in both cases, the eldest was not chosen. It was the younger one. I mean, with Jacob and Esau, it wasn't much difference, but Jacob was pulling on the heel of Esau when he came out. Anyway, that shows that God, some interesting things about God. One is that he rejects our first birth. You could say our good self was, our saved self was grabbing hold of the heel of our evil self when we came out. And it was when we were reborn, so that would be the second self, that we got new birth in his spirit. So in a way, that firstborn, what happened with Jacob and Esau and Ishmael and Isaac, they kind of foreshadowed our second birth and the good things that came out of it. And then we have the rebellious son, the defiant son that refused to accept discipline, disgraced his family, and threatened the community stability could not be there. They had to do something to prevent the community from becoming unstable. If you just ignored your father and mother and did what you wanted, you had, next thing you know, you have communes and it's not a society anymore. The parents were to bring this son to the elders, this disobedient son, this sustaining son, and that the elder's solemn judgment would apply and would protect the family and society. I mean, I can't imagine bringing my son to the elders and say, stone him, but that's what that law said. The goal was deterrence, purge evil from among you so that others would hear about it and not be afraid, to quote some of what I just said. Public discipline reminded Israel that unchecked rebellion corrupts an entire people. Now, I don't know of a single case in the Bible. If y'all do, let me know. But where someone enforced this law, where the son was stoned because of he was evil in the eyes of his parents. But I guess just having that law in the books was a good enough deterrent to distract, to prevent that. I mean, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, but there's just no record of it in the Bible. And then Wiersbe brings up a similar incident that occurred in one of Jesus' parables, the parable of the prodigal son. And he points out that it was the father's quick embrace of his returning son that saved that son, because it showed his compassion, and it shielded the son from death by stoning, by showing he's not a bad son, and he's come back, he's come around. So I never thought of the prodigal son as fulfilling the welcoming of the father. They say he picked up his clothes and did it was not dignified to go running toward somebody in those days, but he did to show his love for his son. So in the same way, Calvary echoes that picture. Our Heavenly Father bore our penalty. He shielded us from the stoning so that he could freely forgive his children like that father did and save us from our death. Then we have divorce. The 4 verses in chapter 24. God designed marriage as a union of one man and one woman united for life. Only death or adultery could dissolve that bond. That's what Paul wrote in Romans 7. So that's a New Testament idea that's still there. Moses allowed divorce as a concession, not as approval. Jesus reaffirmed God's original design and allowed for divorce only for marital unfaithfulness. He said that too. The written bill of divorce protected the woman's reputation and required a deliberation step. So they had to go through this process where all through that required process, they could both think about it and have a chance to reconcile. And so it would discourage an impulsive separation. And then a woman could remarry, because in those days, if you didn't have a husband, you were going to be destitute. Just the way it was. So this was allowing the woman to remarry, was being merciful to her. But if she did that and then divorced that second guy, she couldn't go back to her first husband, because that would be encouraging maybe, oh, let's just have this casual, make marriage very casual. I'll be with you a while, then this other guy, and then back with you, or I'll be with you a while, and then this other girl, and then if I get tired of her, I'll come back to you. That's not what God wants at all. What about the kids that come out of that and taking care of them? The family's disintegrated that way. So these laws were meant to uphold the sanctity of marriage and the dignity of both spouses. Now, I know today that there's a lot of divorce out there, huge amount, both within the Christian community and without. And there are situations where I would encourage people to get divorced if someone's being very abusive, but it's something you really don't want to do casually. that's where society starts to fall. Or because if you view divorce as a very horrible thing, then you're going to be less reluctant just to say, "Oh, let's get married for the see how it works out." Not that you take more time and be more deliberate in your thought process. Okay, let's move on. Talk about humiliating criminals. This is a short little thing, just two verses. Yeah.
If someone has committed a crime worthy of death and is executed and hung on a tree, the body must not remain hanging from the tree overnight. You must bury the body that same day, for anyone who is hung is cursed in the sight of God. In this way, you will prevent the defilement of the land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession.
Okay. All right. So God allowed this public punishment. It was to teach Israel to respect God's laws. For example, in this case, to deter other kinds of capital offenses. The people could, God allowed them to display the criminal's corpse on a tree or a pole. However, they had to remove it by sundown to avoid defiling God's land. This grim thing, this image of this guy up on a pole, it proclaimed that the offender is under God's curse. Paul applied that truth to Christ. He would quote this verse that says he's cursed, to say, but Christ has rescued us from the curse pronounced by the law. We should have been on that pole for bad things we've done. When he was hung on the cross, he took upon himself the curse for our wrongdoing. The shame Jesus bore on the cross became the means of our glory. It unlocked our chains and set us free from sin. Well, what's represented judgment now symbolizes redemption. So now let's move on to loving one's neighbors. What are some things we can do that are either things I guess we could do? We live in the country, or could think, how would I extrapolate that? How would I do something similar to that to my neighbors? Okay.
If you see your neighbor's ox or sheep or goat wandering away, don't ignore your responsibility. Take it back to its owner. If its owner does not live nearby or you don't know who the owner is, take it to your place and keep it until the owner comes looking for it. Then you must return it. Do the same if you find your neighbor's donkey, clothing, or anything else your neighbor loses. Don't ignore your responsibility. If you see that your neighbor's donkey or ox has collapsed on the road, do not look the other way. Go and help your neighbor get it back on its feet. A woman must not put on men's clothing, and a man must not wear woman's clothing. Anyone who does this is detestable in the sight of the Lord your God. If you happen to find a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground, and there are young ones or eggs in it, with the mother sitting on in the nest, do not take the mother with the young. You may take the young, but let the mother go, so that you may prosper and enjoy a long life. When you build a new house, you must build a railing around the edge of its flat roof. That way you will not be considered guilty of murder if someone falls from the roof. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, but you must not carry any away in a basket. And when you enter your neighbor's field of grain, you may pluck the heads of grain with your hand, but you must not harvest it with a sickle.
Okay, so these are all have a common theme of loving one's neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself is one of the laws given in Leviticus back in Leviticus 19:18. And so these are some practical expressions of that overarching law about for daily duties at the time when this was written. Obedience to God was never meant to be some abstract principle, something that sounds good. It touched very concrete things like lost animals and strangers and even birds' nests. Yeah. So if we look at one common theme, we heard there was lost properties and emergencies. Israelites were to return stray animals or lost goods to their neighbors and also help lift a fallen animal if it's their neighbors, even if it belonged to an enemy. Doesn't say it here, but it says it's in Exodus 23:4. It clarifies that. Love is action, not just feelings. Oh, I feel such a love for you. Well, go show it. Go do something. Write a letter to whatever. Send them an email or a text, depending on which Gen Z or X or whatever they're in. Compassion outweighs convenience. That's a good one too. Sometimes it's not convenient to do what you're doing for people, but you do it out of compassion or love. God cares for both people and for animals. And those who share this kind of a heart will show kindness even in the little things. For example, concern for a nesting bird illustrates the Creator's, our God's, tenderness toward all the life that He's created. He loves it all. By sparing the mother and bird, the person who didn't take the bird with him as food or whatever, ensured the future of that bird species, and he displayed constraint over God's creation. Likewise, families who were to build low walls on their flat roofs to prevent problems in the future. They didn't so that somebody wouldn't fall. It was a preventative measures. So true love thinks about how to prevent harm for someone before it happens. God taught Israel that holiness included practical safety measures and respect for all of God's life. And then there's thrown in this idea of loving one's neighbor is generosity. We hear about, a hungry traveler could eat a handful of grain or grapes to satisfy their hunger, but they couldn't go and then bring a big basket with them and gather baskets to take home. I don't know if you've ever had the trick or treat. Will, we did a little, there weren't too many, came to Betty's and Dana's home, but there were a few where we were there with them on Halloween. And when it got to be where they were bringing, their pillowcases that were on the pillows at the dorm room and just holding them out for you to fill up, that got to be a difference that be turned more like gluttony and wanting to grab more than you should. So it said, yeah, gather some of the food in that field if you're hungry, but don't gather baskets full and take it home. Unless the guy lets you, like Boaz let Ruth do. He said, take this home with you. See, God wanted his people to share his abundance with the needy. He did want that, but he didn't want to encourage greed or maybe an entitlement society, a dependent society that you could then control. So this law honored both property rights and compassion. It was the right mix. When Israel loved neighbors and obeyed God, when they did that, he promised to bless the land richly. And that's still true today. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. It's right out of Proverbs 11, verse 25. And we know today that it might not be physical blessing. It might not be tit for tat. Okay, God, I'm going to give you $25. I expect 50 in return for that good thing I did. I gave it to that guy on the street. No, it doesn't work that way. But in heaven, And in the way it makes us feel good, we do get our reward. Next laws that I is going to read about maintaining distinctions. That there are differences in the world. Not everything is all just shouldn't all be merged together. That the people there are differences in this world. Let's celebrate them.
A woman must not put on men's clothing, and a man must not wear women's clothing. Anyone who does this is detestable in the sight of the Lord your God. You must not plant any other crop between the rows of your vineyard. If you do, you are forbidden to use either the grapes from the vineyard or the other crop. You must not plow with an ox and a donkey harnessed together.
Okay, so God wanted his chosen people to remain distinct from pagan nations in lifestyle and worship. Therefore, he built these laws to reinforce that idea. So, some of the things he said that in your daily living habits, there were these their daily habits, you could say, were little sermons about the God they served that they could show to the rest of the world. And so the first one was about clothing and gender. Men and women were to preserve the distinctions God created. So, styles change according to the years. Sometimes beards are in vogue, sometimes they're not. All women's clothing the style seems to change every hour almost. But whatever it is a style, and you can women dress a certain way and men dress a certain way at any point in history. That's on purpose. Cross-dressing blurs divine order and imitates pagan ritual. God created human beings as male and female in his image, equal in worth, but different in role. Erasing those differences invites moral confusion and rebellion. Fashions may vary, as I said, but believers today still honor God by modesty, humility, respect for his created design and how he wants things to be. And then we have this funny law about the verses 9 and 10 of Deuteronomy. Let's look at those. Let's go over. You must not plant any other crop between the rows of your vineyard. If you do, you're forbidden to use either the grapes from the vineyard or the other crop. And this says you must not plow with an ox uh, and a donkey harnessed together. So what's that? Why is it a problem to plant two different crops in the same land next to each other? Well, God forbid this mixing of seeds or yoking of an ox to a donkey, because he wanted to create order and show that there were distinctions in this world that he wanted to keep. For example, let's look at the ox. The ox was clean. It was a clean animal. It was strong. The donkey was unclean and was stubborn. Putting those together is a recipe for disaster. It's just not going to work. It would be full of conflict. So these laws reminded Israel that they were to be distinct from the rest of the world, and they were to keep moral and spiritual separation. We should view every task we do similarly as a chance to glorify God by showing our differences and how beautiful they are compared to the worldly ways. Next, we have some laws about personal purity. I'll skim through some of these. Okay, suppose a man marries a woman, sleeps with her, and then, for whatever reason, legitimate or not, accuses her of her shameful conduct, saying that she wasn't a virgin. I discovered she wasn't a virgin. Then that woman's father and mother will defend her. They'll have a trial, and then her at the end of it, if he accused her, if they decide that he was lying and accused of her shamefully, but if she was not, and they decide that if she was telling the truth, then they've got to they the elders must take that man and punish him, and must all fine him with 100 pieces of silver, which he must pay to the woman's father, and then he's got to marry her and stay and remain, or rather, they're already married, so they've got to remain and can never divorce. Now, if the man's accusations are true, then the woman gets taken to the door of her father's home, and they're going to stone her to death. The reason, in this way you will purge this evil from among you. If a man's discovered committing adultery, both he and the woman must die. Again, God reinforces this idea that you will purge Israel of such evil. Okay, what if the man meets a virgin? There are a couple of cases. One is it's in the city and she shouts out, then people will come and rescue her. But if she doesn't cry out, then right or wrong, then they assume that she was complicit in it, and they would both be taken to the gates of that town and stoned to death. If it's in the country, they assume she probably did shout out and nobody heard her, so that she doesn't get um, in trouble for that. And then what if he has relations with a young woman and she's not engaged to be married? You know, then he's got to, if they find out about it, he's got to pay the father 50 pieces of silver, and then he's got to marry that woman. Because once she's violated, then she her future is to be destitute, because no man would want to marry her, presumably. And then finally, this miscellaneous law that a man must not marry his father's former wife, for this would violate his father. Okay, let's see. God created sex as a gift for marriage and established laws to guard for purity. Chastity also protected practical things. It protected family inheritance and made a strong home. So I think I went through this mostly. If a husband falsely accuses a new wife of infidelity, the parents could defend, the elders would punish, paid a fine, and could never divorce her if he was lying. If the law that law was intended to defend women against cruelty and slander, and remind husbands that love requires loyalty and truth. Adultery required, both of the was involved both of the parties, and that was meant. Why this severe kill both the adulterers? It was to preserve the sacredness of marriage and keep the home intact. A betrothed woman violating the city, yeah, we already went through all that, so I won't restate it. Why were these statutes there? Well, to punish lust, protect victims, and hold individuals accountable for their actions. God's moral law still calls us to purity in heart and deed. And what did Jesus say? Did he relax some of these laws like this? He said, no. Anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And then finally, we have this incest, that sexual relationships with a step parent. That was a capital offense. Clearly, it's a disgusting thing to even think about. because purity within the home preserved holiness in the nation again. Now we have justice and compassion. Deuteronomy 23 through 25:19. We'll cover these in little pieces because that's like most of the reading today in this last section here that we're going to cover. So we're going to learn about some civil and moral commands that reveal God's concern for holiness, fairness, and mercy in public life. It's justice without compassion is cruelty and quickly become cruel. Compassion without justice becomes weak, flimsy, flamsy love that's not really helping anybody. Compassion. Sometimes what person needs is tough love, not. He needs to feel the justice to know to change his ways so that he can be more like God. To have only compassion on a criminal and let him keep getting away with it over and over and over is not helping the criminal, and it's certainly not helping all the people he's hurting. Anyway, let's look at laws about entrance into the assembly. Deuteronomy 23, 1 through 8. I'll read through this. So there are, in fact, I'll just talk about it because it's very explicit in there. It says, joining Israel's worship was a sacred privilege. Let's start out with that because you're getting very close to God who's in the tabernacle, the smoke's coming out of the inner Holy of Holies or the temple later. Physical mutilations or pagan associations excluded certain men from service, from even being part of the service. They couldn't enter the area. That symbolized that God's people must be spiritually whole. That's really the idea behind it that we become so clear in the New Testament. In fact, even in the Old Testament, later prophets forecast a day when faithful eunuchs were excluded, and foreigners and others with defects were welcome. In Christ, every barrier fell. All believers now share full access to God's presence. A eunuch can now enter the Holy of Holies, for goodness sake. And because a believing eunuchs, the temple is inside him. That's what prompted Paul to say there's no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, for you're all one in Jesus Christ. Okay, so then here's some verses, miscellaneous verses in this section on kindness to the poor and needy. We can that in more detail. We've talked about, gleaning, but in the past and just today, but let's hear about some more kinds of ways to be merciful.
If slaves should escape from their masters and take refuge with you, you must not hand them over to their masters. Let them live among you in any town they choose, and do not oppress them. No Israelite, whether man or woman, may become a temple prostitute. When you are bringing an offering to fulfill a vow, you must not bring to the house of the Lord your God any offering from the earnings of a prostitute, whether a man or a woman, for both are detestable to the Lord your God. Do not charge interest on the loans you make to a fellow Israelite. Whether you loan money or food or anything else, you may charge interest to foreigners, but you may not charge interest to Israelites, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you do in the land you are about to enter and occupy. It is wrong to take a set of millstones or even just the upper millstone as security for a loan, for the owner uses it to make a living. If you lend anything to your neighbor, do not enter his house to pick up the item if he is giving as security. You must wait outside while he goes in and brings it out to you. If your neighbor is poor and gives you his cloak as security for a loan, do not keep the cloak overnight. Return the cloak to its owner by sunset so he can stay warm throughout the night and bless you, and the Lord your God will count you as righteous. Never take advantage of poor and desolate laborers, whether they are fellow Israelites or foreigners living in your towns. You must pay them their wages each day before sunset because they are poor and are counting on it. If you don't, they might cry out to the Lord against you, and it would be counted against you when you are harvesting your crops and forget
Okay,
to
so
bring.
let's move to this, that leave some behind, the Ruth and Boaz story. And same thing for beating olives from your olive tree, leave a little bit, a few around. Same thing for grapes. Why? Because remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. That's why I'm giving this command. And then finally, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out grain. All right, so these various laws promoted compassion and they promoted dignity. Fugitive slaves and from other lands. Well, it didn't say from other lands, but Wiersbe added that. They found refuge among God's people. And that was a striking contrast to surrounding nations. Loans to fellow Israelites were to be interest free, and collateral could not endanger a man's livelihood. The collateral you might take, a livelihood, you couldn't take the millstone and you couldn't take a cloak because you might get cold. Business had, so that says business had to be both humane and honest. They were to care for even working animals. You must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out grain. Paul applied this verse. Paul used this verse to those who preached the gospel, teaching that generosity sustains God's work. In other words, you don't want to starve anybody who's doing work. Therefore, you don't starve the preacher who's come to town to teach you about God. And then we've got vows about integrity. Vows, this is the whole idea about making a vow. There's voluntary vows. You could say I'm going to take a vow that I'm going to go fast for a few days. That might be your vow. Whatever it was voluntary but binding. When you make a promise to God, don't delay following through, for God takes no pleasure in fools. God rejected the offerings gained through sin. Okay, if you got this money because you were a prostitute, I don't want it. You keep it. Proving that the holy ends never justify the unholy means. That's why when Judas brought his money to the priests, they didn't keep it because of this law. So they were keeping the law while they were violating the law about murdering somebody. Anyway, God rejected offerings gained through sin that way. And it needs to be gotten in the right way. Worship must flow from clean hearts and honest hands. As Psalm 24, verse 3 and 4 says, who may climb the mountain of the Lord? Only those whose hands and hearts are pure. And then we have verses about justice and honesty. One of them was about kidnapping. That was considered a capital crime because it denied human dignity. Judges had to balance justice with mercy. Okay. The right balance. I think some judges today have it way off the scale on the mercy part and not enough justice. Excessive beating degraded the guilty. They said you can't have more than 40 lashes. that's why Jesus only got 39, because the fence around the law lowered it by one in case you miscounted along the way. But they nevertheless beat an innocent man, and they knew it. That's where the law, you can claim to be carrying out the law while you're not really. But the idea was that even though you were meting out justice, you still wanted to preserve that person's worth, self-worth. Yeah, he made a mistake, but he still made in the image of God. Mergence in a similar vein about being justice and compassion. Justice, they needed to use honest scales because they didn't want to be deceitful. And then this last little bit we'll finish on Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19.
Yeah. Never forget what the
Amalekites, yeah.
did to you as you came from Egypt. They attacked you when you were exhausted and weary, and they struck down those who were straggling behind. They had no fear of God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies in the land he is giving you as a special possession, you must destroy the Amalekites and erase their memory from under heaven. Never forget this.
Wow, God didn't like them. Why? Or the Amalekites, it's easy to get all these Jebusites, Girgashites, all of them mixed up. The Amalekites were the ones, very first ones who attacked Israel when they were tired and exhausted and vulnerable and coming out of Egypt, and they attacked the ones who were straggling in the back. They were just like vultures, parasites. God was on their side, and God helped them defeat those Amalekites, but they didn't really wipe them out. They just chased them back where they came from. So here God commanded the people, once you're in that promised land and you're a strong nation, I want you to erase their memory, just to send the message that such kind of blatant cruelty toward the weak will get divine wrath. God is a God of justice. The Lord of justice never forgets the oppressed, and he calls his people to defend them until Christ finally erases all injustices. Remember in Revelation, there's a scene where all of those who had been oppressed were crying out, "How long, O Lord, how long?" until they see justice. And Jesus comes, and then there is justice forever afterwards, and that's coming. To summarize, in today's scripture, Moses presented laws about family protection, about the strength of a family, criminal justice. Okay, we've got these laws to prevent further crimes and because justice needs to pay back the person with compensation who was hurt or robbed or whatever. Laws about how you're to be a good neighbor, loving neighbor. Laws about how this people was to be a distinct people that was going to be a light to the rest of the world. And so even built into some of their daily functions were distinctions that you would think, why do you need that one? But muzzling an ox to a stubborn mule or donkey, or growing two crops in the same field, those were ways God could really drive home that point that you are a separated nation. And then laws on personal integrity, being a good person and not giving in to sexual cravings. And then finally, daily living, about some of the things they were doing. And then this little aside about paying back the Amalekites to show justice. Next week, we're going to climb Mount Ebal and Gerizim, at least in our minds, in the minds of the people who were still on the other side of the Jordan from those mountains. But That's where they were going to, Moses wants them to shout down the blessings if they obey the covenant with God, and the curses if they don't. So we have the Mount Gerizim and the Mount Ebal, and renew that covenant with God. They do that. They say, yes, yes, we understand what those curses are. We understand what the blessings are going to be. So we want to renew our covenant. We're willing to accept that challenge. That's next week. And with that, are there any questions or comments? Anything strike you as odd or needing to be discussed more?
I know one thing. It sure would have been hard to work at chicken houses and to dress all those years.
Yes.
To what?
In a dress.
Oh, in a dress.
That works like a man, and you just could not wear women's clothes.
Oh, working a chicken house in a dress. Well, okay. Okay. Well, in those days, the men wore dresses too, really.
Tunics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about the Duncans? Any comments?
I think some of these laws, if we actually followed them today, we'd be a better society. We don't,
Absolutely.
even the minor rules we don't follow, let alone the major ones, as a society.
Yep.
Would be the idea of being so divided and so tribal, that we are today. We wouldn't be that way. That's like putting the donkey and the ox together, We need
Yeah.
to, yeah,
Donkey and an ox or donkey and an elephant, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. We shouldn't be so unequally yoked in this divided country right now.
Right. And
Yeah.
and in our personal relationships, they say nowadays that there are as many divorces in Christian families as there is in non-Christian families.
I
And
know.
you know, we should try to keep some of these laws instead of just ignoring them or laughing at them and thinking they're just quaint.
Quaint Testament ideas that no longer apply in this fancy, sophisticated world we got now. We know better, and we can handle it today where those primitive people couldn't. It's probably our attitude of a lot of people, but it's wrong. They were humans just like we are.
Exactly.
And so, a good point. Anything hit you, Ida?
Well, I was really interested to discover that the meaning behind the father running out and grabbing his son on the prodigal son parable, that son was under the laws, he would be stoned to
It
death.
would have been stoned if they found him, and the father had a choice. He could either welcome him or take him before the others. The law doesn't say that the others go and get him, regardless of what the father says. It's that the father is the one who initiates the punishment.
Mhm.
And they didn't have a police force, so it was up to the people to keep the laws. So that gave that father a lot of leeway to decide what does it mean for him to dishonor me. Okay, well, I ran this over a little, so I'll go ahead and end with our prayer as we go forward in this coming week. Dear Lord, thank you for this lesson. Thank you for your laws. Help us and everybody in this world to pay attention to them more and see that your laws aren't quaint old ideas that no longer apply in fancy, sophisticated world. We've not created a nirvana that no longer needs your laws. We need them badly, Lord. Help us to get back to some of these fundamentals that have made us more closely, at least, obey you in the past, and help our nation and other nations to realize the value of family and of having a father and a mother in a child's life, and the value of having a family and that in raising that, and what that does, not just for that family and that little situation, but for the entire nation and the entire world. Help us to get back to that, Lord, and enjoy this beautiful man and wife combination you've created. In Jesus' name we pray. Thank you. Well, y'all have a great week now, and we will see.
Safe travel to you and Ida as you're on your way.
Okay. Next week, I will be in a hotel room again in Houston this time because I'll be going to a key Rice University where I went to school. We're having a big reunion for our class.
Oh,
And we'll be 45 years. I can't believe that.
wow.
Yeah.
We're 45 years old, Ralph.
The class of 1980.
Oh, thanks,
So,
everybody.
okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
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 Yeah.
Okay.